Malik Dervan ruled East London streets with fear, Tariq Rolls vowed revenge with fire, and Jules Varga moved in silence, killing without warning. Together, they ignited the bloodiest turf war the UK has ever seen. East London has always carried the weight of history and struggle. Within its concrete estates and shadowed alleyways, a new kind of threat was rising. Silent at first, then growing louder with each passing month. The Red Line Syndicate wasn't born in a boardroom, or through any structured legacy. It was created from anger, poverty, and a deep hunger for control. At the center of this storm was Malik Dervan, a young man with sharp instincts and a colder heart. Malik was only 17 when he first tasted real power. He wasn't the strongest, nor the loudest, but he was the smartest. He understood something. The others didn't: how to build loyalty. He didn't demand respect. He earned it by organizing, protecting, and punishing. While other kids in the neighborhood were stealing phones and spray-painting bus stops, Malik was already mapping out turf lines and identifying weak spots in rival groups. He was methodical, calculated, dangerous. Within 3 years, Malik turned his small circle of friends into a sprawling gang operation. They called themselves the Red Line Syndicate because of the invisible line they claimed through the boroughs, a boundary no outsider was allowed to cross. Their operations were sharp and diverse: drug trafficking, moped robberies, illegal weapon sales, and more. They set up trap houses inside vacant flats, used food delivery apps to move product, and recruited younger kids, many only 13 or 14, to run errands in exchange for protection or fast money. Those kids were called ghosts, invisible to both the law and rival gangs. Malik's system was built for survival. The Red Line Syndicate didn't just grow, they dominated. Within months, their red spray-painted slash became a chilling signal across East London. Anyone passing through Red Line territory without permission was either taxed or attacked. They had spotters on rooftops, encrypted phones, and safe houses, with multiple exits. Malik didn't allow chaos. He ran the gang like a business. No excessive violence unless it sent a message. No unapproved robberies in their own postcode. He enforced order through fear and reward. And soon, local dealers who had refused to pay the Red Line tax began disappearing one by one. But power doesn't go unnoticed, especially in a city filled with rival ambitions. While Malik was building his empire, another threat was gathering. Momentum just south of the Thames, the Gravesend Union, a gang less organized but equally brutal. They operated mostly in South London, but had recently begun moving east, desperate to expand after a series of police raids weakened their hold on key areas. Leading the Gravesend Union was Tariq Rolls, a silent but deeply calculated man in his early 30s. Tariq wasn't interested in fame. He moved in silence, avoided cameras, and only appeared when necessary. But underneath his calm exterior was a storm of rage, and that rage had a name: Malik Dervan. Years earlier, when the Red Line Syndicate was still finding its feet, Malik had ordered an attack on a small crew encroaching on his territory. The ambush had been swift, brutal, and ultimately left 2 people dead. One of them was Tariq's younger brother, Ezra Rolls, a mistake Malik didn't even remember. But Tariq never forgot. And now, years later, he was preparing to even the score. While the Red Line Syndicate grew increasingly powerful and publicly untouchable, Tariq began rebuilding the Union from the shadows. He avoided traditional methods and focused on creating a flexible, mobile network of fighters and dealers. Instead of claiming postcodes, Tariq focused on hijacking the Red Line's supply routes and cutting off their income. Slowly, methodically, he began planting seeds of chaos: a few missed shipments, a few stash houses found ransacked, a few Red Line soldiers found dead, first in South London, then in East. Malik noticed. He always did. But what unsettled him most was not the violence. It was the silence. There were no tags, no warnings, just sudden, precise losses. And Malik hated losing control. In response, he called a meeting at a warehouse in Stratford. Only his top circle attended. That night, a name was whispered for the first time in years: Tariq Rawls. For Malik, it was personal now. He ordered a counterattack, but this time with a different kind of precision. If Tariq wanted a war, Malik would bring one, but on his own terms. He brought in Jules Varga, a name that sent shivers through the streets of Eastern Europe, a man who had once silenced an entire rival crew in Berlin with nothing more than a wrench and a rope. As Red Line prepared for the oncoming war, both sides knew something unspoken. This wasn't going to be about money or power anymore. This was personal. Blood had already been spilled, but far more was on the way, and London, a city used to hidden violence, was about to witness something far darker, a street war no one could contain. Canning Town had always been a rough part of East London, grey tower blocks, narrow roads, and a constant hum of tension in the air. But by the spring of that year, it had become something else entirely, the front line in one of the most brutal gang wars the city had ever seen. The Red Line Syndicate controlled the area like a fortress, with spotters on corners and armed lookouts stationed inside tower flats. To Malik Dervan, it was one of the most critical zones in his network, but it was also the most vulnerable, and he knew it. Tariq Rawls had chosen Canning Town for a reason. It was close enough to Red Line territory to send a message, yet far enough from his own Gravesend base to allow plausible deniability. His plan wasn't loud at first. The Union moved into Canning Town quietly, setting up shop in a few abandoned flats and slipping their own people into the area disguised as delivery riders and street vendors. At first, they didn't attack anyone. They just watched, gathered information, tracked movements. They knew the Red Line's routines, the faces of mid-level runners, the cars they drove, the safe house entrances. Then the blood started. The first to die was a young Red Line runner named Corey Manners. His body was found inside a burnt-out car under the flyover, hands tied behind his back, one bullet to the head. Malik didn't need confirmation. This was a message. Days later, another Red Line associate was shot in broad daylight outside a corner shop. No mask, no warning. The shooter walked away before anyone could react. Panic began to spread through Red Line ranks. It wasn't just the violence, it was the silence around it. The Union weren't tagging walls or shouting threats. They were just eliminating people. In response, Malik tightened his grip on the area. New rules were enforced. No one moved alone. Phones were changed daily. Safe houses were relocated. But the Gravesend Union was always one step ahead. It was as if someone inside the Syndicate was feeding them information. Paranoia began to fester. Then came the fire. One night, a Red Line stash house in Canning Town went up in flames. 2 of Malik's soldiers were inside, burned beyond recognition. The building had been doused in petrol and locked from the outside. Fire crews arrived too late. The public, already anxious from the growing violence, now lived in fear. Local residents refused to talk. Witnesses disappeared. Even the police struggled to get anyone to come forward. Malik, under immense pressure, decided to strike back with full force. This wasn't about territory anymore. It was about reputation. Weakness invited betrayal, and Malik couldn't afford to look weak. He unleashed Jules Varga, the enforcer he'd brought in weeks earlier. Jules was cold, methodical, and had no emotional ties to anyone. He didn't speak unless necessary. He didn't make threats. He just acted. Within a week, 2 known Gravesend lieutenants were gone. One disappeared on his way to a meeting in Woolwich. The other was found tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse in Leighton, eyes covered with duct tape, neck broken. Word of Jules' work spread quickly. Fear returned to the streets, but so did confusion. If Malik's forces were so precise, how was the Union still hitting back? That's when the whispers about Leon Sayers began. Leon had been a founding member of the Red Line Syndicate before Malik's rise. He was once considered Malik's equal, but a failed power grab had exiled him. Now, years later, he was back, and, standing beside Tariq Rolls, the streets buzzed with the news. Some said Leon was feeding Tariq the Syndicate's secrets. Others believed he was the true mastermind behind the Union's sudden rise. Whatever the truth, Malik knew this was a serious threat. Leon didn't just understand the structure of Redline, he had helped build it. With each passing week, more Redline operations in Canning Town collapsed. Drugs went missing. Traps were sprung. Police raids struck key locations suspiciously, quickly. Inside Redline meetings, loyalty turned into suspicion. Malik started rotating his own circle, replacing lieutenants, issuing silent tests of trust. Jules Varga, meanwhile, began operating independently, targeting anyone he believed to be a leak. People disappeared without clear connections to the Union. Malik's control was slipping, and the violence was escalating beyond his reach. In the middle of all this chaos, the public paid the price. A young boy was struck by a stray bullet outside a community center. An elderly man was attacked when his flat was mistaken for a Union safe house. News outlets began reporting daily incidents, and pressure mounted on the Metropolitan Police. A task force was assembled, Operation Concrete, designed specifically to dismantle both gangs by any means necessary. But even with increased surveillance and raids, the blood kept flowing. What had started as a silent takeover was now a full-blown war. The Gravesend Union and the Redline Syndicate weren't fighting over drugs or money anymore. This was about pride, legacy, and revenge. Tariq wanted blood for his brother. Malik wanted to crush anyone who dared challenge him. And Leon Syers? He wanted to burn down everything he had once helped build. Canning Town had become a battleground, and no one, not even the civilians caught in the crossfire, was safe from what was coming next. The violence in East London escalated beyond what anyone had imagined. As the conflict between the Redline Syndicate and the Gravesend Union intensified, the streets turned into a battlefield soaked in fear and silence. By now, the war had spilled far beyond Canning Town. Entire neighborhoods, from Stratford to Plaistow, became contested ground. It wasn't just a gang war anymore, it was an unraveling empire. Malik Dervan, once seen as untouchable, found his control cracking under the weight of betrayal, paranoia, and relentless attacks. The return of Leon Syers was at the heart of this collapse. His knowledge of the Syndicate's structure made him a deadly asset to Tariq Rolls. Safe houses were no longer secure. Routes used to move drugs and weapons were intercepted. Entire shipment lines were disrupted. Even more damaging was the psychological toll. Malik no longer knew who to trust. Every face in his inner circle was now a potential traitor. Informants were suspected everywhere. Orders were carried out, slowly or not at all. The fear that Leon was feeding Tariq real-time intelligence gripped the Syndicate from the inside. In response, Malik tried to reclaim control using fear. Executions were carried out in private. Anyone suspected of disloyalty vanished. Loyalty was tested through brutal tasks. People were asked to betray their friends or set traps for their own crews. Jules Varga, now operating without oversight, became the symbol of Malik's desperation. He stalked the streets like a ghost, dealing with suspected traitors and enemies alike. His methods grew darker: torture, public examples. No one knew exactly how many people he had killed, but the message was clear. No one was safe. But fear alone couldn't hold the Red Line together. Key figures began defecting to Tariq's side or disappearing entirely. Some fled London. Others turned themselves into the police, preferring prison to the uncertainty of life within the Syndicate. The empire Malik had spent years building was collapsing under its own weight, piece by piece. Meanwhile, the Gravesend Union moved quickly to fill the power vacuum. Tariq's lieutenants took over newly abandoned territory, absorbed smaller crews, and even began negotiating with independent gangs in North London. For the first time, it looked like the Union might win. But Tariq wasn't motivated by dominance. He was motivated by closure. He wanted Malik dead. That was the only outcome that mattered to him. Then, without warning, the police struck. Operation Concrete had been quietly gathering evidence for months. Surveillance, wiretaps, informants, all working behind the scenes while the gangs tore each other apart. When the raids began, they were surgical. Dozens of Red Line and Gravesend Union locations were hit in a single night. Drugs, weapons, cash, millions in criminal assets were seized. Nearly 40 arrests were made. But the leaders were still missing. Malik had vanished days before the raids. Some said he'd escaped to the countryside. Others believed he was still in East London, hiding in tunnels or abandoned buildings. No one knew for sure. But what was certain was that his grip on the Red Line was broken. The Syndicate was now leaderless, fragmented, and desperate. Tariq saw the collapse of the Red Line as the perfect moment to make his final move. But instead of launching another attack, he disappeared too. Rumors suggested he had gone underground to avoid arrest, while others believed he had followed Malik's trail. No one had seen him in days. Then everything changed. In a shocking turn, Malik resurfaced, but not how anyone expected. He kidnapped Kyla Denton, the daughter of a local counselor and community figure. No ransom was demanded. No message was sent. It was an act that made no strategic sense. The kidnapping was reckless, emotional, and out of character for someone once known for precision. It sent shockwaves through the entire criminal world. Even Malik's remaining allies were stunned. The media exploded. Police launched a massive manhunt. Malik became the most wanted man in London overnight. Streets were locked down. Borders watched. The city was gripped by fear and confusion. Why would Malik take a girl with no ties to the gang world? What was he planning? Before answers could come, his car was discovered under a bridge in Barking, completely burned out. No body was found. No signs of Kyla. The police couldn't confirm if Malik was dead or if this was another manipulation. But what they knew was this. His empire was gone, and Kyla Denton was still missing. In the days that followed, panic turned into silence. Red Line soldiers scattered. The Gravesend Union retreated from public view. Tariq Rolls remained missing. Leon Sayers had not been seen in weeks. And Jules Varga? He disappeared the same night Malik's car was found, leaving behind nothing but a blood-stained coat in a safe house. The war that had consumed East London ended not with a victory, but with disappearance, destruction, and unanswered questions. The police had crippled the gangs, but the damage was already done. Communities were scarred, families destroyed, and the leaders who had started the war had vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only blood, ashes, and fear. Weeks passed. London tried to return to normal, but the wounds of the turf war remained fresh. Streets once claimed by the Red Line Syndicate or the Gravesend Union now stood silent, abandoned, watched by police patrols and locals too afraid to speak. The empire Malik Dervan built had crumbled into dust, and with it, the illusion of control that once ruled East London. Yet, despite the silence, one question echoed through every corner. Where was Kyla Denton? Her disappearance remained unsolved, and the public pressure mounted with every day she stayed missing. The police worked round the clock, chasing leads, interviewing dozens of suspects, and combing through CCTV footage. But it was as if she had vanished into thin air. With Malik's burnt-out car offering no clues and no trace of a body, investigators were trapped in a fog of uncertainty. Some believed Malik had taken his own life after the kidnapping. Others whispered that he had escaped with Kyla to use her as leverage against enemies, though no demands ever came. One thing was clear. Nothing about the crime made sense. The media called it London's coldest flame, a fire that burned bright and destroyed everything but left behind a mystery no one could solve. Rumors spread across social media that Kyla had seen something, heard something, or perhaps knew more than she should have. But she had no criminal connections, no enemies. She was the daughter of a respected counselor, known for her charity, work. Her kidnapping didn't fit into any known pattern. The police theory was simple. Malik, paranoid and desperate, had snapped. But some officers believed otherwise. A hidden breakthrough came when a burner phone, recovered during one of the final Red Line raids, was decrypted. Among hundreds of useless texts and location pings, one name stood out: Jules Varga. Though presumed gone, possibly dead, his digital footprint remained. The phone's GPS history placed him in Barking, the same night and place Malik's burned car was discovered. Police quietly reopened files on Varga. He had no known family, no past contacts, and no paper trail. It was as if he only existed when Malik needed him. Then, from nowhere, a tip came in, an anonymous message sent to the Operation Concrete Task Force. No name, no return address, just coordinates. When officers followed the directions, they found an old, padlocked cellar beneath an abandoned butcher shop on the outskirts of Ilford. What they discovered stunned even the most hardened detectives. Inside the cellar was a makeshift prison, concrete floor, metal restraints, chains mounted to the wall. In the corner, wrapped in a dirty blanket and too weak to stand, was Kyla Denton. She had survived, malnourished, frightened, barely able to speak, but alive. She had been missing for 31 days. Kyla's rescue made headlines around the world. The media swarmed, politicians praised the force, and the city seemed to exhale for the first time in weeks. But her statement, delivered days later through a specially appointed officer, shattered everything. She hadn't been taken by Malik. According to Kyla, her abductor had been a man she didn't recognize, someone who spoke little, moved like a soldier, and operated with precision. She described him as tall, silent, with a strange European accent. The description matched only one man: Jules Varga. She never saw Malik, not once. No voice, no presence, no threats, just Varga. Cold, mechanical, and controlled. This revelation changed the entire investigation. Malik was no longer considered Kyla's kidnapper. The new theory was that Varga had acted independently, possibly double-crossing Malik during the final days of the war. But why take Kyla? Why keep her alive? No answers came. With this new information, the search for Varga reignited. Europol was contacted, old files reopened. It turned out that Varga had been wanted in several countries, linked to unsolved killings, in Romania, Germany, and France. He was a ghost, used by many, loyal to none. The Red Line Syndicate had never truly controlled him. He had always been something else entirely. As for Malik and Tariq, both remained missing. Some speculated they had been killed in an unseen clash. Others believed they had fled the country, waiting to rise again. But law enforcement quietly leaned toward a darker theory, that Varga, cleaning up loose ends, had removed them both. Permanently. The gang war that once threatened to engulf London had ended, but not with arrests or peace. It ended with disappearances, secrets, and the haunting possibility that the real architect of chaos had never been Malik or Tariq, but Jules Varga, the man no one ever truly understood. In the end, the streets of East London grew quiet, but the scars remained. And somewhere out there, in a place no one could trace, walked the man who had burned down 2 empires with nothing more than silence, patience, and precision. London had survived its bloodiest turf war, but the truth behind it may never be fully known.